Now that we've had a chance to define innovation and entrepreneurship, and also take a look at the relationship between those and related concepts, let's take a bit of a deeper dive into innovation itself. To reinforce the discussion we had earlier about why innovation is so important, let's take a look at the pace of change that we're seeing within most organizations these days, as takes place over time. And if you were to say less innovative organizations are the red line, perhaps trending down. Blue would show some trend up. In between those lines, we've got a term that we call molebow, more or less business as usual. Now, let's contrast that against the rate of change, the pace of change that we see all around us. We see massive change in technology, in connectivity, in globalizations, in the environment, in data, in competition, in this incredibly competitive global economy, with, as we talked about in our last section, new competitors popping up all the time, led by smart, innovative disruptors, well-funded, seeing things perhaps that many of us don't. So against this backdrop, as far as why innovation is so important, we ask the question, where does it come from? One of the things to take a look at, by the way, is what's embedded inside the word innovation itself, nova. And we talked about it during the definition, a little bit about something new that drives value and that drives differentiation. Of course, nova really reinforces that newness around innovation. So where do these new ideas come from? Well, one of the places that they come from may be your own R&D facility. Focused research, internally generated, that's been going on for a while, to whether it's reinforce or build upon your current products or enter new markets. Another place innovation comes from is an insight that a leader may have. Could be an entrepreneur, could be a business executive. That's an insight into the marketplace, into a need. And that's internally built. But then we also have this whole concept of open innovation, where outsiders, customers, partners, other stakeholders may say, I have a need, and they'll partner with you to help drive that innovation, oftentimes in partnership. My colleague Solomon Darwin will be talking about open innovation in a later session. Where else does innovation come from? Well, sometimes it just comes from that vision of an entrepreneur, that vision of a Steve Jobs or a Richard Branson to make change happen, to persevere. A Larry Page and a Sergey Brin at Google, for example. All entrepreneurs with that vision. Tesla, another great example as well, with Elon Musk. The vision of an entrepreneur. Sometimes it comes with just asking questions or seeing unanswered questions, questioning the status quo and saying, how is it that we can come up with a new innovation, a better solution? Oftentimes, all of this is a result of perseverance. It's through iteration. It's through successes and through failures, and learning from your failures and persevering until you're able, as an entrepreneur, as an organization, to be able to attain that desired outcome. And oftentimes, innovation is built upon the work of others. Many times, innovation doesn't happen alone. Think of Thomas Edison and the light bulb. He who famously said, I've learned 10,000 ways that the light bulb won't work. Of course, there were dozens of other inventors at the time that were seeking similar solutions. And Thomas Edison both built upon his own work, but built upon the work of those other innovators. And sometimes it just takes a bit of good luck. And it's not just good luck, but it's also the ability to keep your mind open for those serendipitous outcomes, for those drugs or those products that didn't necessarily have the outcome that their inventors expected, but turned into great successes. On the drug front, Viagra, of course, is often used as one of those ultimate examples. Viagra, as you probably know, was originally intended to be a heart drug, an angina drug. And it didn't meet all of its intended objectives, yet the male patients kept coming back for more until its creators, until the people running the tests realized, of course, that there were other reasons, that there were other issues that the drug addressed, left themselves open to that, and it's one of the most successful drugs ever invented. Where does innovation come from? These are just a few of the examples. Now that we've looked at why and where, the next question is how. And one of the ways that I like to look at innovation is through some simple frameworks. Because if we're going to create sustainable innovation, we have to have repeatable, sustainable, and communicatable ways that we can share our thinking and how we want to drive innovation. This 2x2 grid is really useful. If we take a look at this lower left quadrant, we can look at it and say, okay, what are we selling now? Let's see if I can make this interactive here. What is it that we are selling now to our current customers? That's our current marketplace. If we decided that we wanted to sell our current products to new customers, we would move in that direction into a new marketplace. Let's say we wanted to sell products not just in the US, but also in Europe. We've now moved into a new marketplace. But let's say that we said, look, we're going to continue to sell in our current marketplace, but we want to actually drive line extensions and sell new products, or we want to introduce new products altogether. Think of Google, which is in the search engine business, now working on self-driving cars, for example. Entirely new marketplaces. And in some cases, of course, they may be moving with new products into new markets altogether. Now, you don't always need to go directly along this line. In fact, that's often one of the hardest. What you may wish to do would be to move from your current markets and your current products into a new marketplace and then into new products. So there are various ways to think about innovating that product market mix. This is a framework that's very helpful. One of the things to keep in mind when we talk about frameworks for innovation is that not all innovation needs to be this disruptive, revolutionary innovation to be effective. And we'll use Tesla as an example here. If you think about Tesla, their massive disruption was the Model S sedan. Elon Musk's massive disruption was creating a luxury car that was a huge, a high-performance car that was also entirely electric into a marketplace that had not successfully accepted those types of products. That's the massive disruption, the big innovation. But then we can take a look at evolutionary change as well. Following on the introduction of the Model S, what has Tesla done? They've introduced their Model X, which is the all-electric SUV, and they've started to diversify, to evolve their product line. Highly evolutionary. They're still doing a lot of different things, like the gull-wing doors on that Model X SUV, but not that massive disruption that we saw with the Model S. But they do a lot of things at Tesla that may be much more incremental or efficiency gains that are still innovations. I toured the Tesla factory not long ago and took a look at the way that they manufacture their cars. And once they've created the chassis, they put the chassis on a dolly, and that dolly follows a magnetic cable that is laid out on the factory floor, on the production floor, essentially with duct tape. And regularly, the factory line workers get together and they look at ways that they can drive greater efficiency, that they can combine manufacturing steps, that they might be able to eliminate a step or reorder steps. And how do they change the manufacturing line? They take that magnetic cable and they move it. They rip up the duct tape, essentially, change the location, the route of that cable, and the dollies that the chassis go on follow that new production line, so they're able to innovate, to change manufacturing in real time. That's a small I innovation, yet a very important one as well. And what that shows you is that innovation at Tesla starts at the very top with leadership like Elon Musk, but also includes everybody across the organization, including those that are on the production floor assembling the vehicles. Finally, when you have multiple innovations, how is it that you manage them? How is it that you organize them? How do you think about your innovation pipeline? And there are a number of different tools that are available. This particular one here, this innovation portfolio matrix, comes out of work at Harvard, which looks at different innovations across different time frames with different levels of investment and different levels of certainty. So if we think about innovations that are further out, that have a lower likelihood of making it to market, and over time they move up this curve, this line, into the H1 or the near term with a higher likelihood of making it to market, it shows how you can really manage your innovation pipeline. You can look at that for gaps, or you can look at it for areas where you may have too many innovations bunched to be able to effectively deal with them. And if you think about what happens to innovations over time, a number of them are going to fall out. Others may end up consolidating in a way that you take, say, 3 of them, and they then move together into that next generation. So it's a visual way of mapping the different innovations that you have in your pipeline and how you can then also allocate resources, market timing, go-to-market planning, sales, and all of those other elements that are going to be attached to successfully commercializing these innovations. That's our quick overview of the why, the how, and the where on innovation. I'll be back to you soon. In this section, we'll move from a discussion of innovation to focusing on entrepreneurship. And the 2 key topics that I want to address are, number 1, how we teach entrepreneurship at UC Berkeley, and number 2 is the sets of an entrepreneur, the 3 sets that we focus on, which is skill set, tool set, and in particular, the entrepreneurial mindset. One of the questions that I get all the time, I and my colleagues get all the time, is can entrepreneurship be taught? Now, of course, I teach entrepreneurship, so my answer is going to be yes, but more to the point, can we make a difference in the outcomes of entrepreneurs through the approaches that we use to teach entrepreneurship? And there as well, the answer is a resounding yes. So let me start with a little bit of a story, which is going to illustrate how we teach entrepreneurship, how I teach entrepreneurship, and also how it helps create better and more relevant outcomes. And there's a lot of changes in the way that we teach entrepreneurship now, as opposed to the way we taught it a number of years ago when I first started teaching this topic, and even more years earlier when I first started studying this topic. I want to start with a brief story. This is a story about my daughter's 18th birthday, which was not too long ago. And I asked her what she wanted to do for her birthday. This is a picture of us. And she said she wanted to jump out of a perfectly good airplane, and she wanted me to do that with her. And she knew that I would say yes because I had done that myself on my 18th birthday. So after this picture was taken, not long after this, here's me hurtling towards the ground, having just stepped out of a perfectly good plane at 20,000 feet or 15,000 feet at about 120 miles an hour, fortunately, with an experienced skydiver strapped very tightly to me. It's a great experience. And I got to thinking about how the experience of skydiving was now versus what it was many years ago when I was 18 years old. And then I'm going to draw a parallel to the way that we teach entrepreneurship and how that has changed. My current experience, 20 minutes of training, got in the airplane, jumped that day. I had an expert guide with me. Everything went great, smooth landing, and I got this wonderful free fall of 2 miles. When I had done it many years ago, we trained for 5 hours. In fact, we trained so long that we had to come back another day. We jumped out of the airplane, but there was no free fall. The parachute immediately deployed. We didn't get that experience of actually skydiving. And what was particularly interesting is the moment we jumped out of the plane, the reality of the conditions that we met was fundamentally different from everything we had trained for. We jumped out of the plane, and it turned out there was a breeze, relatively brisk breeze, and it blew us away from the approved landing zone where we were supposed to touch down. In fact, it blew us several fields over, and we touched down in a cornfield, and my friend ended up in a cast for 2 months. I was fortunately okay. But what happened was all the training that we had gone through didn't help us one bit. Now, let's talk a little bit about how we teach entrepreneurship and how we used to teach entrepreneurship. When I first started studying entrepreneurship, and even when I first started teaching it, the way we would approach this topic was to write a business plan, to come up with a concept, do some market research, and write a detailed business plan. We would then use that business plan potentially to raise funds, to build a product, to create our marketing plan, which was part of that. And then we would go to market months, if not years later, and hope we were right. What happens when the business reality was fundamentally different from our assumptions? Well, we would have just wasted a lot of time and money. The way that we currently practice and teach entrepreneurship in Silicon Valley is that we create ventures and we use these essential entrepreneurial tools in real time. And this is true for entrepreneurial ventures, but can also be well applied to corporate entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship ventures as well. Some of those innovation initiatives that we started to talk about. Now, this is really important to keep in mind because the challenge that we see in today's arena is that from an entrepreneurial perspective, it may never have been easier to start a business, especially a technology business, than it is right now. Fantastic ideas, access to capital, access to markets, much faster cycle time when we talk about creating products, wonderful resources. And that's also why the second part of this statement is equally true. It's probably never been harder to scale an entrepreneurial venture and succeed because there's so much competition. And of course, that competition just doesn't happen from right next door, but it also happens from halfway around the world. How do we teach innovators and entrepreneurs? How do we teach them to scale in real time? Well, we use a really basic iterative approach. If we take a look at this, the first thing we'll do is as we have teams come together with ventures they're working on, we'll introduce new concepts. We'll then have the teams apply those learnings of whatever those concepts are, and I'll go into that in just a minute, and start to create plans, prototypes, go-to-market strategies. They'll then go out and they'll test those. They'll test those with potential customers, with channels, with other mentors or advisors that may provide that feedback. They'll get feedback from all of those individuals, from those markets. They'll integrate those learnings, they'll iterate it, and they'll evolve the venture. And then they'll do it all over again. In fact, in my courses, every week we'll address a new concept, and we'll go through this cycle again and again, building upon the learnings of the week before. All of this, that iterative process, is also part of a more linear process as far as how you think about scaling a venture. And this particular diagram is the high-level overview of a program that I helped create called Learn to Launch. And in it, we have teams that define their opportunity, that learn about the market, the product market fit, what their customers are looking for, that launch, prototype, and early stage products. And then as they're successful, they then attract more resources and accelerate and scale. So if we take a look at those iterative processes overlaid upon a progressive scale like this, you start to have a sense as to how we think about and teach entrepreneurship at UC Berkeley. I mentioned that there were three types of sets that we focus on when it comes to entrepreneurial education and the type of training that I provide entrepreneurs and the various entrepreneurship classes that I teach at UC Berkeley and more broadly. And those three sets are providing entrepreneurs with the right tool set, the right core tools that they need to be effective. Number two, it's then putting those tools to work and practicing those skill sets, building that muscle memory to be effective. And then finally, all of that needs to be driven by the right entrepreneurial mindset. So let's take a look at each of these different sets in order, shall we? First of all, what are the types of tools that we provide entrepreneurs with? What are the types of tools that entrepreneurs use every day? And in particular, as you study entrepreneurship with me and my colleagues, what are the tools that we'll provide you with and that you'll start to put to work? They include elements such as this: competitive positioning, looking at your competitors in each of these different categories, and then determining where is it that you are that is differentiated sufficiently. It's understanding the customer life cycle. Super important to understand who is your customer and how do they think and act and relate with your product. And this deals all the way from how they become in this pre-purchase period, how they become aware and knowledgeable of your product, what moves them into that consideration mode, and then of course the important thing here is when do they originally try it and buy it. But your work isn't done there. You then want to work with your customer to provide that great experience and move them from left to right as we move along here. So they move from satisfied customers into those advocates that tell others about your product in a way that helps you grow your business organically. And of course, those are the best types of customers of all. When we talk about customers, let's make sure we understand who they are. So we'll work on one of the tools that we use as a persona or personas of your key customers, understanding who they are, not just from a customer standpoint, but who they are more broadly. That will help you as you figure out how you go to market, how you build experiences, how you incorporate new features in your products and services. We also have a number of different tools around business models. This one happens to be a version of the Osterwalder business model canvas. And in fact, when it comes to business models, we'll return to that. I have a whole class on business models later on in this series of courses. By the way, with business model, what's the key thing? The key thing that a business model helps define is how you make money with your business and how you're able to do so in a sustainable way. Now, these are some of the tools we provide. How about the skills? It's understanding how to use those tools and then some. So some of the skills that we talked about knowing who your customer is, but then it's going through this process of discovery, of customer discovery. What is it you know about your customer? How do they interact with your product? How can you accelerate adoption? What are the problems they're trying to solve? This whole process of customer discovery is an entire discipline upon itself. We also do a lot of work around design. We incorporate design thinking, which again is customer centric. What are the problems customers are trying to solve? How do they go about solving them now? And how can we provide a better solution than that which is currently available? And to help with that process, that thinking will also incorporate elements like rapid prototyping. What you see here is an example of a rapid prototype of a heads-up driving display that one of our teams put together in the span of just an hour or so to be able to start to bring rough concepts into much more concrete form so that you can get feedback and so that you can continue to iterate. We also have models and skill sets that we develop around elements like pricing. What are your strategies around pricing? What's the quality of your product? Are you adopting a low price or a high price strategy? Are you looking to gain economies of scale or skim that those early adopters that we talked about in our last session off with a higher price before you move into the larger marketplace? All skill sets that we develop. And one of the areas that we really focus with our entrepreneurs is how to be able to communicate effectively in the way that you present your venture to investors and to other stakeholders. Because that presentation, and we work very hard on these communication skills, that presentation becomes a very important tool, not just for fundraising, but also for business development, for recruiting, and for other components.